My name is Zach Powers. I'm the artistic director at the Writers Center, and that means I do a lot of things, but one of them is I get to welcome people and to events like this, and sometimes even host them. So I'm the host this evening, and I'm really excited to welcome our guest tonight, Marisa Crane, for the Writers Center's virtual craft chat series, where we talk with writers a little less about what they wrote and a little bit more about how they wrote it. Marisa, thank you so much for joining us. I love this book, and I'm so excited to have you with us this evening.
Thank you for having me. It's so lovely to see your face again virtually.
Yes. So we've only met virtually, right? We've never.
Yeah.
We did the Bread Loaf Writers Conference virtually 2 years ago or so, something like that. And we were.
Which feels crazy that it was 2 years ago.
It does feel like it was like yesterday. Like I was, and it was with the author Laura Vandenberg was leading the workshop we were in. She's an amazing author and really great. So, oh yes, it is sold out in bookshop right now. That is correct. So. But you can reserve one, I think.
Yeah, it's on back order. A little fun news is that my book went into a second printing already. So that's,
oh my God.
Why it's out of stock at bookshop.
So in case people don't know, second printing is a huge deal. That almost never happens. That's outstanding. So this book has just been, I didn't realize we were that close to that. So wow, okay. I'm excited now.
I was really shocked, but obviously elated, but sort of like, what the hell is happening?
Well, to get started, do you have your book handy and able to read just a short excerpt, a couple paragraphs, to just a little taste so that our guests know what we're going to be talking about if they haven't read the book yet?
Yeah, I'll just start at the beginning because it's much easier to not have to explain any background. The kid is born with two shadows. You better believe I head straight down to the Department of Balance office to appeal their decision. It isn't right giving an extra shadow to a baby. It's not like she killed you on purpose, Bo. She's a newborn baby, for fuck's sake. She's basically a more sophisticated potato. And that's exactly what I tell the receptionist resting his boots on top of his desk. He's long and slender with a droopy face. Where's the father, he says. I'm her other mother, I say, trying to steady my pulse. I always hate this moment of vulnerability, of simultaneously waiting for and anticipating a reaction. Oh, I see. He clears his throat, then lowers his boots and leans his elbows on the desk. Sorry, those desks are automatic shadow assignments, ma'am. What do you mean, I ask, knowing fully well what he means. His lips part into an approximation of a smile, as if daring me to challenge him further. Is it because I have one? Because that's not her fault, I say, my face gathering heat. No, ma'am, it's standard procedure, he says. That's not true, and you fucking know, I say, stopping myself before I accuse the department of living up to its reputation. Everybody knows they're homophobic, racist, transphobic, ableist, xenophobic, sexist, all the goddamn phobic and is. But they'd sooner strip away my extra shadow than admit it. And yet, punishing a newborn still seems excessive. But maybe I'm giving the department too much credit. I'm afraid I don't make the rules, but I do make people hell-bent on breaking them wish they hadn't, says the receptionist. I haven't been a widow, what a miserable, lonely word, for more than an hour. I don't want to lose our baby too, but what I want matters very little to my temper, which I can feel building behind my eyes before it finally overflows, wet, hot tears streaming down my face. It's always been this way, my anger and sadness, twin forces inside of me. I look down at the squish-faced kid, expecting to find a sleeping baby, peacefully unaware. But no, she's wide awake, her big swollen eyes full of questions, her blue-gray alien hand pressed to her cheek. Come on, I say, between sniffles. Please don't do this to her. He knits his eyebrows together in a painful display of empathy. It would have been kinder if he punched me in the face. You've got to be fucking kidding, I say. We don't exactly kid around here, he says, at least not until happy hour. He laughs when he said this, and I imagine him and the boys at a high-top table, spilling pints all over each other and sharing the day's stories. The kid and I no more significant than a cockroach squashed under his foot. Fuck you, I say. I watch him clench and unclench his jaw, perhaps deciding his next move. Although I can't see him, I can feel the security guard inch closer to me, his movements quiet and fluid like a good hunter. I readjust my grip on the kid. My breath grows stale in my chest. Get her out of here, says the receptionist. This shapester's not worth my time. The security guard grips me by the bicep and escorts me out the door, releasing me back into the world with a small pointed shove. Upon confronting the car seat, I realized it'd been your job to learn how to use it. It takes me 20 minutes to get all the kids' parts where they need to go. Except for her second shadow, it has a smug freedom about it that sets my teeth on edge. I swear I catch it high-fiving mine. That's where I'll stop.
Thank you. So before the questions about the book, just real quickly in your own words, who the heck are you?
Who the heck am I? That's the question, isn't it? I'm writing a whole memoir and trying to figure that out. I'm a queer, non-binary writer. It all feels like labels, you know? Like I'm an athlete, a basketball player, I'm a parent. I'm a Philly person. That's it. That's all I got.
Good. I forgot the Philly connection. So, so the first question we like to ask is, some people hate it, some people love it. So hopefully you're on the at least indifferent side of that thing is, what's a question you really wish someone would ask about your writing or writing practice? In other words, what haven't you gotten to speak about before in this book tour or in other times?
You know, I've been thinking about this, and every interviewer and every person that's talked to me about my book has asked me the most thoughtful, like amazing questions. And they've all picked up on all of these things that I love to talk about. So it's actually really hard to think of something like that, because I felt that people have really gotten what I wanted out of this book. And, people ask me about the experimental stuff and the fragments and the point of view and the humor and, a lot of things that I saw we're going to be chatting about today. So it's like, I feel very seen. But my publicist did point out that nobody has asked me, despite my bio saying that I'm a sweatpants enthusiast, that nobody's asked me about what sweatpants I like. And I know that has nothing to do with writing.
No, this is important.
But
this is a writing process question for sure.
It is. I thought it was really funny. She's like, I've been like quietly waiting for someone to ask. She's like, it's right there. So that, I can delve into my many uses of my sweatpants. I like to wear big baggy Champion sweatpants when I'm sitting and writing. So I feel like I'm drowning in them. But then I have like my nicer going out sweatpants when I leave the house, and they just aren't so disturbingly baggy. They're like a little bit tighter and can pass for pants. And then I have my workout sweatpants. Yeah, none of us is that important.
I feel like there's an essay here. I do feel like there's an essay in your future, the sweatpants essay.
Like the different uses of sweatpants. Like we think of them as lounging, but I think that there's so much.
So if you write this, you do have to thank the Writer's Center for having inspired the sweatpants essay.
Oh, I will. I think maybe one thing is nobody really asked me about like writing rules though, like whether I have rules or whether like my relationship to them. I don't think I've gotten that question, which is that I don't believe in writing rules, and that I have like one for myself, and that's just to play, which I also noticed that you were excited to talk about. But that's like the hard and fast rule for myself, is like to play and delight in what I'm doing. Because if I'm not having fun and enjoying the process, then who's going to enjoy reading it?
Mm-hmm. That's great. So getting to some of the topics that I'm feeling a little bad that you've had some of these questions before. So now I'm like going to off the cuff come up with some like really random ones.
No, please don't do that to me. No, no, the overarching like themes are there, but you definitely have some like new things for me. Okay. And it's always helpful. It like stretches my brain. Like sometimes I'm just like, oh wow, like I gotta sit with this for a while.
Yeah, so let's go with fragments and chunks first, because this book is told in a fragmented style as opposed to big long chapters with like single storylines, single kind of plot lines going through a single chapter or longer. This is, paragraph to paragraphs long chunks, multiple over the span of 2 pages. When you have the book open, there could be several chunks or more. So I'm always excited by chunks. So I'm interested in what the origin of the fragmented style was. Was it part of this novel from day one? Was this novel always in this style? Or was it something that developed as the novel went from your head to the printed, or the, I guess, computer page, probably, as you were working on it?
Yeah. It was always that way. And I think that's just because that's my natural way of writing, because it's how I think. So I think that that's how things come out from my brain to the page. I've written things that aren't fragmented before, but they're always like not my natural inclination. I actually have to force myself to like stay in a moment and not like break it up. So yeah, it's sort of how I think, like the way I make associations and kind of make leaps and bounds from thought to thought. So it always was that way. And I wasn't thinking of it intentionally. It's just when I sat down to write this and explore that idea, that was how it started moving. And it was really useful for me because the book drops into scene right away. And we don't have backstory. We don't really have any historical context. And it was really helpful for me to have these fragments where I could drop in memories, drop in backstory, and like sort of short moments that while still keeping that like forward propulsion, like keeping that narrative action going. You know, and there were a lot of times where maybe I was in earlier drafts, like slowing down too much and giving too much backstory. And that's where like fragments are so useful. You can just snatch one out, put it somewhere else. Like you can move all these pieces around in a way that can really control the pace of a book. And it can go from super slow to maybe not super fast, but is keeping up with that forward action and that current narration.
How did the fragmented pieces come to be in this order? Because you mentioned snatching them around. I mean, how much is cutting and pasting and how much is sort of there's a main structure, then a few pieces moved around to work with that?
Oh my gosh. It felt like just moving a million puzzle pieces around like at all times until something like clicked. I started a lot of drafts like over and over again throughout my revision process because I was getting so overwhelmed by going into this 300 something page document and being like, okay, well, I messed up and I know that I need to like move all of these parts around. And then that would just turn into this clusterfuck. So a lot of times I would just open a new document and be like, okay, I know what order I need these things to go in now. Now it's a matter of grabbing it and rearranging it and pasting it over. But it's like, I'm terrible at puzzles. Like more terrible than probably like the average person telling you that they're terrible. Like that part of my brain is missing. I've never been able to sit down and do a puzzle. And here I am like doing this with words. And it was just like, why did I do this to myself? But then it feels really magical when it clicks. Like when you are doing that and you get that moment of satisfaction and you're like, this is the perfect transition. And like, this is the perfect place where this goes. Like, then that feels like such a mini celebration for that. You're like, yes, like that's locked in there. Yeah.
Yeah, that brings one of my questions like very much to the forefront. I'm very interested in how the small pieces interact. And for me, I think about what happens in that little white space between the breaks of the breaks. Like there's this little bit of white space and there's something happening between this here and this here. So what's happening and what do you look for to happen? When do you have an idea of what that magical moment, what makes it up, what it's made up of?
So I found this like random scrap that I wrote the other day comparing fragments to like, again, this is my like sports background, but like players on a field or a court, and that like, okay, the fragments are like people's bodies, like the players, but like sports are so much about space, and they're about like attacking space, and they're about creating space for people and how everybody's bodies are moving around in this space. And I like totally forgot that I wrote that, but then I was like, this makes a lot of sense to me because that space is just as important as the people who are doing this work or whatever. For me, what's happening in that space is often like making those leaps and those associations that I was referring to, like, but then I also think that that white space can be really personal and change from reader to reader, like what's happening for them. Everybody reads at a different pace and everybody pauses at different places. And for me, that's sort of what's fun about fragments. Like maybe somebody read something and, you know, that resonated with them or made them think or something. So then like they are pausing and that white space is maybe acting like a really long break for someone, where maybe other people are skipping right over that because they want to get to the next thing. But I think it can be very personal experience.
Mhm. So I was also curious about this style and maybe who are the influences for this novel. You said this is how you think, but is this also something that you picked up from reading? I immediately went to Jenny Offal, Patricia Lockwood's novel. No one was talking about this, and Maggie Nelson's Bluets in particular, just because those are like my go-to fragmented things. But also, this book is very its own thing compared to them. It's not functioning in the same way those are. So I was wondering if that maybe they or other influences in the style were in your background somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, it is sort of silly, like all of the different influences that I have. Like people are like, oh, you have a dystopian book. And then I'm like, yeah, Jenny Ofal's my influence. And they're like, what? But no, you're absolutely right. Like that fragmented style came from that. Like I'm a huge fan of Department of Speculation. And I didn't actually read Patricia's book until after I wrote my book, but I loved it. Why Did I Ever by Mary Robeson is fragmented. It's like hundreds of random fragments that she actually had like written on note cards and like random scraps of paper, like over a long period of time. She was like struggling with writer's block. So like to fix that, she just started scribbling random notes like on all of these things, and it ended up compiling it and making this novel. But she also uses humor really well in the face of like dark themes. And I also think that Jenny Ofal does as well. So yeah, both of those styles were influential as far as fragmented. But then, you know, like content and voice and various things like that. Like there's so many other people like Carmen Ray Machado, of course. George Saunders is a big one for me. You know, especially Escape from Spiderhead, that story in 10th of December. Yeah, it's just like a random collection of people, which is, and also like, to be honest, a lot of flash fiction has been really influential for my novel, and that was sort of where I started publishing. And I just respect that world so much and love all of the indie magazines that are publishing like experimental flash, micro work. I think all of that comes out in the parts of my books of the experimental elements. But figuring out how to, okay, now how do I expand this stuff and bring it to a novel in a way that makes sense. I also, Multiple Choice by Alejandro Zambra, his novel, is written, the entire book is a standardized test. So yeah, I love experimental stuff. Like I eat it up.
I do want to say too, I mean, I noted some people who are maybe influences, but this is in no way derivative from that. It's like the fragments are the shared thing, but like, I mean, reading you and Jenny Ofal side by side are like very different experiences in good ways, because you know your voice is so strong and comes out very differently than Jenny Ofal's does, I think, when you're reading her book. So one thing I think the fragmented style allowed in this novel, and probably what I did later to what I said, was a lot of freedom for the narrator to develop on the page. This is a sorry, laughing at the chat where you sweatpants with multiple S's. This is a really great narrator and a lot of amazing lines, and like a lot of lines concluding sections that just like really hit hard. That flash fiction probably influenced, where like the last moment of these things really hits beautifully. Can you talk a little bit about, first of all, the you of the novel? Because it's a first person novel, but it's not, there's this little you in the novels. There's like, it's first person with a twist of second person in it. So can you just talk about the perspective a little bit? So we got it in the reading example you did too.
Yeah, I'm glad you did ask that, because a lot of people are like, oh my God, you wrote a second person novel. And it's like, no. But yeah, I don't remember who used this term with me, but it always stuck. Like someone called it first person direct response, or something like that. Because it's like, yeah, there is an I, like Chris is narrating it. But it's just like a long letter, right? Like told through many, many years of her life. It, for me, like that was again, it feels like a cop-out. It's like it was always that way. But I just felt like in this terrible moment of grief and loss, like, this is what I would do. I would just talk to my loved one. And she's feeling really lonely and isolated and scared and confused. And she has this brand new baby that she has no idea what to do with. And is like, okay, Bo is going to be the one who is going to like figure this all out. And I was going to like take her lead. So I think it was also serving a practical purpose of like, Chris needed someone to talk to in these times. And I felt that it made the book more intimate, like almost like the reader is peering in on this conversation that she's having. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because the you, which some people identify as actually a distancing thing, is the initial reaction. Some people who hate second person, like, well, I'm not you, I'm not doing this. In this way, it almost works the opposite. It like draws you in because it's an empathetic you. It's empathetic in a way that a second person maybe isn't, because you recognize that the you is a longing. It's this person longing for something that they can't have. So I love the way that this particular brand of first person worked. So, it's a really compelling voice, and because it's dynamic in covering the ranges of emotions and covering vulnerability to wisdom from time to time. And how did this voice develop? You said some of this happened just all along, but was this, are you a voice first writer? Was this like the voice that existed from the beginning? Or is it something that you sort of discovered in drafting, and then once you realized you had it, you went back and redrafted everything that didn't have it?
I am typically a voice-driven person. Like, before I get something on the page, it's more like a character that's like haunting me or following me around or talking to me. And so that's usually where the engine is for a book for me. But this one, I did actually have the conceit first. Which is generally not how it goes for me, but I had like the world in mind. But when I was creating Chris's character, like, I just love voicey stuff. Like, I love reading voicey stuff. I love Miranda July, like, more than anything in the world. And Mary Robeson's Why Did I Ever is also very, very voicey. And I just think that for me, that's what keeps me reading, is that I want to jump to the next fragment because I want to know like what weird thing this person is going to say or do. Weirdness is like a part of voice for me, finding strange ways to say things on the line level. I think that's part of what went into my voice development with Chris, was what's a more surprising way to say something that's everyday, and what's a little bit stranger way to do it. And then, just leaning into her neuroses and anxieties without hopefully making them too annoying. I think there's always a balance there in character. You want to give someone all of these like defining qualities without like pushing people away by being like, oh my God, not this person talking about exoskeletons again. Yeah, like that's a good example, kind of giving her this grounding behavior that she does, and we're able to learn about her through this behavior. We know that she does this when she's feeling like particularly vulnerable or stressed out or upset about something. So yeah, a lot of those grounding elements.
You mentioned Miranda July, and I was looking. I think her section's like right behind me on the shelf, so I was looking back. But then you were mentioning that sort of grounding thing with the exoskeleton. That made me think Amy Bender and like an invisible sign of my own kind of situation. So now I'm going an Amy Bender route with like that technique. So that's really interesting. One thing that I think I mentioned this in my previous question is that Chris, the narrator, really balances wisdom and folly. Like, this is a character who does have some perspective. They're not like just a constant screwing up every turn. They are emotional and they have experiences. They're not always in control, but they do have moments where they are self-aware. There's self-awareness in this character. And I really think it's really hard to balance a character who can be both self-aware and also open to error. And I'm wondering how you let a narrator share that kind of legitimate wisdom that they possess, that they've learned through, this case, through a couple incredible tragedies in their lives, and then still be flawed and vulnerable and just beautiful screw up.
I wish I had like a really firm strategy and answer for you here. What I love to read and write is like about fucked up people. Like it's just more interesting for me. If I wanted to just read about someone who's just well behaved, like I don't know what I would do. Read a kid's book maybe, but I don't know. So I think the wisdom that Chris gets along the way, for me had to feel earned in a really real way, and had to be sort of dispensed through these experiences. I don't think it would have landed in certain moments if it'd come too early, or if it had come like maybe, I don't know. I was going to say like through the vehicle of someone else, but she definitely does have people who are kind of pulling her along in this way. Like Siegfried plays like a really big role in the first part of the book and sort of like pulling her out of her like preconceived notions about different things, like for self-forgiveness and blame and whatnot. So I think, I don't know. I don't have a great answer to this question. I just think
I think those are all great answers, but
I know, but I'm like, you asked a direct question. I need to give an answer. Yeah, no, I think they've just got to be earned moments and they've got to stand on their own. Stephen Florida, I love Stephen Florida. That's what someone just said in the chat.
oh, I have, that's been on my list for like forever. So Lori, thank you. Maybe have forced me to finally read Stephen Florida.
That's a super voicey book too, like very voicey.
Yeah. So Amy just mentioned, or not Amy, Emily. I'm going to confuse the two of you all night. I don't know what's going on. Emily just mentioned in the chat that we do welcome questions. So if you have a question, I'd love to ask your questions. Please just type them in the chat, and I will read them aloud for the viewing audience, and we'll go from there. In the meantime, I definitely have plenty more I can ask for my own list. So there is one of the main characters is obviously it's a baby at the beginning, but the kid becomes a kid at some point and becomes a character, and literary kids seem just as hard to raise for me as real ones, as someone who does not have kids and never will. So I'm just interested in the process of creating a kid character who doesn't come across as I mean, I think it's hard because literary kids don't have to be pure kids. They have some literary role. They're a little wiser than their years. Sometimes that's what makes them great in ways. But they don't want to push that so far that they become completely unbelievable as children. And similarly, you don't want to push a kid to be so precocious that you're like annoyed by their precociousness. Like,
yeah.
So how do you, how do you pull that off? I mean, was that something you worked with? Was that something you were aware of? How did you handle this kid as a character as she developed?
So she actually has like a lot of lines that I pulled from real life. It's interesting because I think some of them are lines that people would 100% be like, a kid of this age would not say that, and they did. I used to have a job that was sort of similar to Chris's old job in the book. I worked as a behavioral health worker and a mental health worker, in a school setting, and then also in a partial hospitalization setting, with kids as young as like 5 up to like 15. And it was like really the greatest time. Like, I really love kids. I didn't always think that I wanted kids myself, but I've always loved kids and connected with them, and like really found them fascinating as people. Like, I think that they have so much wisdom to share. I think what helped me bring out this kid's character was having Chris not really treat the kid like a kid, like not necessarily in like a dangerous way, but in an age appropriate way. But Chris doesn't like really sugarcoat things. She doesn't like baby talk. She just says it how it is. Like, they have conversations. And for me, that helps bring out the kid's character some more, because she feels safe to say these certain things. She feels that she can come to Chris and ask these sort of difficult things, because Chris is like, I'm I'm going to tell you the answer. Like, and if I don't know the answer, I'm going to tell you that I don't know the answer. And so much of that also helps with the kid's character, because this kid is like, wants to know everything, is soaking up all of this knowledge. And when Chris doesn't know, you start to see her personality come out of like, screw you, if you don't know, I'm going to find these answers somewhere. But what was important to me for the kid was to give her agency. I feel like then like have her own desires and her own passions that are separate from like Chris's character arc. So much in fiction, I feel like I've read where the kid is just sort of an accessory to like an adult's like eureka and like healing and growth. And it's really, they're just sort of like a tool. And I really did not want to do that with the kid. I wanted her to just be her own person, have authority, have agency, and just like wreak havoc.
I mean, she's such a good character. So, I mean, yes, you 100%, that was accomplished completely. That's such a good and compelling character. I love that character. I mean, I don't know, maybe my favorite character, because she just like, I mean, I wrote this one thing down because she drops sneaky wisdom sometimes. I love nothing more than a character dropping sneaky wisdom. Like, it's like in the middle of a scene, they say something, and this was the narrator actually says she was appalled by her wisdom, referring to the kid, after the kid says, how come everything that's important isn't good and everything that's good isn't important? And I sat with that shit for so long. I was like, oh my God, this is how I'm gonna put the book aside for a minute. I'm gonna sit with these ideas. And there's more to a little bit more explanation and elaboration on that question that is just so I was like, wow, I'm just gonna sit with this for a while. This is because it is totally a kid question, but it's also a gut punching kid question. Like, this is the time where the kid looked at the world and realized all the ways we messed it up, perhaps irrevocably. And we have to look at it and maybe find some way to, anyway, but it was, I love that so much. Yeah, I mean, do you think in terms of literary function with characters? Because I mean, I feel like there's times where she's a great character. She's always a great character, not times. She's always a great character. There's times where she also has that little literary, like that's to me was a moment where this character could function thematically, to be cold and cruel and take all of the magic out of writing and talk about it really practically for a second. I really just like that moment there was like, it was so effective. And maybe as a writer, I'm like, why was this so effective for me as a reader? Why did this make me like, oh, okay, I got to think that this one character. And if the narrator, if another character had said it, it wouldn't have done that. So it's totally tied to character too. Do you think of literary function, I guess, or almost mechanical function of a character when they're in a scene like that?
Yeah, for sure. So that is something that a 6-year-old asked me one time. And I was like, I don't know. Like, great question. I don't know how to explain that to you. But yeah, that's kind of where it comes back to like the puzzle pieces and like knowing that I have the parts, but like where they should go. I feel like I had a lot of lines that I wanted the kid to say that were thematically related without, coming across as contrived or forced. And it was more like finding the right moments to drop them in, making them feel natural in that conversation, natural to the kid's voice and curiosities and whatnot. So a lot of that did come in with moving those fragments and redrafting and finding where these lines would be the most effective.
And there's one thing about kids is great too, is like, it can be a little random. And that's maybe one of the powers of kids. Like, their minds are not functioning in like we have straight logic beaten into us by the time we're adults, and a kid can have this like intuitive leap. And those leaps are always so like, and that's what you want in writing, right? I mean, that's sort of the white space between chunks, is that intuitive leap, and kids can do that within a scene.
Right. And they can like ask a question that doesn't relate to anything that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because like, that's what they do. So you're just like, if you're like, what do you want for breakfast? Like the kid's just going to come up and just be like, okay, so what we know about space travel, like, it's just like how kids are, like, they're self-centered and they want to talk about what they're obsessed with right now and what they're interested in. So that also gives a lot of freedom when it comes to dialogue and conversations and movement on the page. A kid can come in and sort of disrupt something, even if it's in a small way.
So just for the record, if anyone wants to answer any of my questions with what they know about space travel, I'm 100% on board. You don't actually have to answer my question. It's talking about space travel. Um, I'm also interested in humor, because this is a book about loss and grief, and it is a dystopian future, but it's not bleak. I feel like there's bleakness, but it's not, I would never characterize this as a bleak book in terms of the tone. And I think part of that is because this narrator in particular is one that has levity, and even in the midst of horrible things, there's something in her persona that turns to humor. Maybe as a crutch, but it is there as a narrative element. And I'm just wondering how you just generally, how do you balance levity and heaviness? I mean, where does a joke fit in when the character is surrounded by things like grief and trauma and loss?
Yeah, I think for me, like, humor keeps me alive. It keeps me resilient in the face of turmoil and stress and in my own life. And I think it connects people. So and it's always been, I've always loved the marriage of humor and tough topics. A lot of my short stories are the same way. Like, I'll talk about religious trauma, or, you know, I don't know, being closeted or something like that. But then, like, I think it's the weirdness and humor can go hand in hand really well. Where it's maybe quiet humor. I'm not so into like really big jokes or anything like that,
Yeah.
but it's more so like what I was saying on that line level, the surprising language. I think a lot of that can create levity without making a joke out of something that's really serious. Like, and maybe this isn't like, ooh, this is really funny, but in the passage that I read, when Chris says, it's talking about the car seat, I could have easily just had her say, it takes me 20 minutes to figure out how to use the car seat or whatever. But she says, it takes me 20 minutes to get all of the kids' parts where they need to go. And like, maybe that's not overtly funny, but for me, it evokes like it can evoke sort of a silly image of like imagining someone manipulating like a baby's parts, like going like this, that, and the other thing. So like there's parts like that where it's like she's struggling, obviously, but giving her those sort of strange like linguistic tics and like things like that help create levity for me. And it's also like, who wants to read 370 pages of someone who is just like really, really depressed the whole time without, like, it's like that contrast, right? Like the contrast of depression and humor. And usually a lot of people use humor as a coping mechanism. So it also felt natural and genuine to her character. And I think it can help engage readers. Like, I know it does for me. If I'm reading something and like Luster, like I laughed out loud at so many moments in Luster. Yeah. It's not a funny book, but it has a lot of humor in it, especially on the line level where she's just like, oh, I'm like a person trapped in a skin suit or whatever she says. There's like always this line that where it's like, that's funny. Like, it's minor and it doesn't necessarily really matter to the overall narrative, but like if I'm getting like fed these little bits of humor, like I'm going to be engaged with that voice and sort of follow it anywhere.
I think my luster's on the shelf, maybe right here. So yeah, we're hitting my bookshelf hard tonight.
I was going to say, should I just peek on that?
Yeah, exactly.
Shelf and just start name dropping?
I also have a cat. Like, if you see me reaching back right now, there's a cat interfering with the bookshelf to distract us during the event. So another thing I love, I think very much related to humor, is a sense of play. When a writer very clearly has a sense of play, and I think we've covered this a little bit. I think you mentioned it at the beginning, that's something you might have been wanting to talk about a little bit. It feels like you enjoy the process of writing, and that's, I think that's an underrated quality in writing. I really like. There's the suffering artist, and I've never related to the suffering artist so much as the hey, let's see what we can do artist. And I get a little bit of that from you. So I've lost my question. No, so I guess the first question, is that accurate? I mean, is it accurate that you enjoy this process and it's something you want to engage with?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And how do you transfer the energy from the process onto the page? because I think that's something you do really well. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about how this because you could enjoy writing and still not write something very good. And you seem to both enjoy writing and write something that's very good. So how do you
Well, the percentage there, I'm like shooting at like 2% from the field. Like, but thank you. A lot of it is still in like my flash fiction roots of like just writing experimental fiction. Like one of my first experimental pieces that I had published was in the form of MapQuest directions. If anyone's old enough to remember MapQuest, where you'd print them out and be like, oh shit, well, I made a wrong turn. I don't know what to do now. Yeah, and the whole thing, so it is like second person, but it's like instructions of this person, and it was called Directions from Birth to Gayhood. It was all about my journey from, realizing that I might be queer to actually like arriving at that destination. And it's very abstract and sort of silly in a lot of ways, but I had so much fun writing it, and I try to channel that all of the time, like in the means of I'm trying to keep, and this is impossible I don't want to act like this is something that I succeed at all of the time, but I really try not to think about publishing expectations and audience expectations. They creep in there, of course, but like, I'm like, if I'm going to do this thing for the rest of my life, like I need to not dread sitting down. Like I need to be so excited about this thing that I'm chasing. So even if it sounds completely unmarketable, like it sounds like an unhinged idea where my agent's like, okay, sure. Like it's what I want to do. Like I'm going to do it and I'm going to explore it. I think like that transition that you're asking about, like the getting it down on the page, I've found a lot of success in just sitting with an idea for a really long time and sort of meditating on it, while life happens. Like I used to be a really fast writer, and that didn't really serve me that well. I would sit down and just be obsessed with getting it out, like getting on the page, because I'd seen so many authors be like, well, if you just get it out there, then you at least have a draft, and having a draft is better than having no draft. And this is valid advice, I think, but it doesn't work for me. I would sit down and it'd be really messy, and something that I wasn't really proud of. But I found that if I take a step back and I just sort of brainstorm in my head and problem solve in real time before I've actually written something, like I'll be like, here's my concept and this sounds really fun, and I want to explore this, but like, okay, what's my problem? Like there's something right now that's not quite working in the idea, and I'll just like, be rocking my kid, doing the dishes, whatever, all the things that we do, and all that is writing to me. So then when I sit down now, I usually have a really good idea of the meat of what this is going to be and what I want it to be, and that gives me confidence. I think so much of that play comes from confidence too, and authority. So if I'm excited to sit down because I know that I cracked that code last night, I figured out this one character's desire or their motivation that I hadn't been thinking about before. Okay, I cracked this little code. Like I'm stoked to sit down because now I know how it's all going to go, and I feel like that goes hand in hand there. Being confident gives you that like permission, I think, at least for me. Like I have permission to lean into the weird, into the experimental, into trying out new things.
Yeah. Is there a flash fiction collection in your future? That's just a random question. Like I feel like you're talking about writing a lot of flash, and I want to read your flash now. So you can find it online, I'm sure, some places, but
yeah. I don't know if a flash collection. I have thought about like sort of, and again, it's like what's marketable, but like I would like to have a short story collection that has a lot of flash pieces in it. That's not necessarily like the standard like 20-page short story collection. So maybe one day.
I don't know if I've ever written a 20-page short story. I feel like I'm like 11 pages was always my wheelhouse. Back to the fun thing. I are enjoying writing. I also feel like fun is kind of a dirty word sometimes, for at least some writers, and I think that they see it's like almost antithetical to being respectful of subject. How do you have fun but remain respectful? How do you you treat these subjects in this book, for example, with I think incredible respect. and at the same time, there's a lot of fun happening around them. How do you balance that?
That's such a good question. It really is. I I feel like I wrote something down, not to be corny, that I'm like, but you asked such good questions that I was like, I
This is
don't
the
need.
most flattering moment of my interviewing career, that someone took some notes down for something.
Yeah, well, I was just like, I don't even know where it is.
Oh no, then you lost it.
Yeah, but I don't necessarily know if like play, maybe that respect should be pinned against each other. I think I respect them enough to, well, some of the playful moments, like the pop quizzes and whatnot, they're really a way to interrogate Chris's thoughts and feelings in a more fun way. Like, I don't know another word for it. Like, she could just sit there and be like, oh, no, my line of thinking is wrong, and here's why. And she could just like reflect that way. But like, that's sort of boring, right? Like, have some, this pop quiz thing is sort of like, maybe not her conscience, but almost like a second part of her saying like, hey, let's think about this a different way. Or are you just self-pitying yourself right now? So it is fun to sort of have those interjections. I think that almost that play is a form of respect for these characters, giving them, and also the humor, like giving them that space to have joy amongst such a terrible setting. So yeah, I mean, I want to undirty the word fun, because I think if we're all going to be doing this, like, people can sit down and say that they're suffering and that writing sucks all they want. Like, I know there are writers that say that they hate writing, but like, that's not for me. And I think if you want to stick with something, you should really love it.
I think that should be said more often, and nothing wrong if the suffering route is your route. There's different
Yeah.
ways, but it's not the only route. I think that's the important thing.
Right.
I also think something made me really think when your answer was really made me just like, fun can be a point of access to the subject. Like, it's what, like, if I'm enjoying writing, it's what letting me get into this subject. It's if I'm having fun, I feel like that means I've tapped into something meaningful, and that's where I'm going to run with it. If I'm not having fun, then I'm like slogging through something and probably not actually connecting with the subject.
That's it. I think that's exactly it. So much of like experimentation for me is like a window, like it's creating a window into like really deep emotional traumas and a character's psyche. Like, so it is, that's exactly what you're saying, like the access. I think it gives you that window into these things.
There's a couple questions. I'm going to ask the second one first because I need to go back up and read the first one. Second question is, what are your typical writing habits? For example, you get up at 5 a.m. and write for 3 or 4 hours, I wish, or do you write where and when you're inspired, any time of the day, and hold off if you aren't?
So it's had to change a lot over the years, but I did have a time when I was revising Exoskeletons, I did wake up at 5 every day. I wrote it on unemployment in 3 months, which I'm back on unemployment again, if anyone has any content marketing jobs. Yeah, so once I got a job, then I would get up at 5 and write until about 7. And that was it for the day. But ever since then, it's been sort of on and off. Like I said, now I view writing as thinking. I don't have as much free time. I have a 2.5-year-old now. So a lot of the writing happens off the page. I write a lot of like notes in my phone. If I'm just doing something else and I thought like, oh, this next chapter or something should be about this, I'll maybe like quick write something in my phone. So then when I do have a moment to sit down, maybe an hour or something, I have a good idea of what I want to write. So that there's more like writing time on the page and less thinking, if that makes sense. I don't subscribe to like the write every day thing. I know that's really useful for a lot of people. For me, it's more about thinking about it every day, getting in that mind space.
So the previous question, so the first question in the chat, we have an author who's written a book that they feel is similar to yours in several ways, but querying for ages for a year without any luck. And a lot of the feedback gotten one note saying the book is too long, unsure whether they should rewrite again or submit to indie presses, or any thoughts on what a next step might be in terms of trying to find a home for this book, or maybe should it be taken to another revision?
Joshua, how long is it?
I guess that's an important question.
Yeah.
7,000 pages. Yes, you should probably trim it. As we're waiting for that response, just Pam had a question. 183,000 words from Josh.
Oh, wow. Okay. I think that works for sci-fi novels. I'm not, Zach, do you know anything about this? I'm afraid I'm not going to be super helpful with this answer. My book is like 90,000, but I do feel like more genre, like hard sci-fi and stuff.
I think 183 is probably high by most standards. It's not impossible to sell that. It's way easier to sell a 90,000 word book.
Yeah,
that's the simple truth of it. But I mean, there's so many factors involved, and a year is not necessarily. I had 2 novel manuscripts in 4 years before I had an agent. So you're within a reasonable amount of time. The length is going to make it harder to sell. I mean, that's the harsh, true answer. I think that length is going to make it harder to sell. So it's up to you whether or not if it harms the book artistically, then you have to take a real hard look at whether or not that's something you're willing to do. Yeah. I feel like there's no quick answer to this one. I feel like this is a long discussion on its own. Joshua, you're welcome to send me an email at the Writer Center. My email's on the website, and can think and strategize. So please use this as a resource. That's what we're here for. So maybe not. I don't think we can tackle this one in the Q&A, but please, yeah, excellent. And there's one last question, which one of my favorite questions, which is: do you outline or do you throw it out as it comes to you?
My first draft of I Keep My Exoskeletons to myself, I did not outline, and I just feverishly wrote it. And it required about a year of revisions with my agent because of that. So I wouldn't necessarily do that again. My writing process is evolving a lot because of that experience. I think I was like, okay, I hate revisions so much that this is not really helpful for me. So I wrote a second novel, finished it a few months ago, which is like a queer coming of age basketball novel. But that one I outlined very generally. I don't like to control too much of what's going to happen in a chapter or anything like that. Like, I really love the process of discovery. But I had a general arc of sort of like how I wanted things to go. And that helped me feel free to play and experiment within that outline. It gave me a lot more control. And I think when I finished it, I had a much stronger draft because of that. There wasn't so much moving major parts around or having major plot issues.
Yeah, great, thank you. Well, we're right here at the end of the evening, so I have our final question that I would like to throw to you before we wrap up for the evening. And the final question is: what's one piece of advice you give to a writer just starting out?
I really think it is to play. Like, I'm just going to stick with that because it's what I believe in, and it's what has led my entire process. I think that, and to write into your obsessions, like the things that you cannot stop thinking about, your curiosities, the questions that you want answered. I found that anything worth writing for me has come from an obsession, something that's just chasing me everywhere I go. Like, you have to work on a book for so long that you better be obsessed with that thing. And I think that that's going to produce such stronger writing, and everybody's going to be able to see that. The readers are going to be able to see that passion come through, no matter how niche the obsession is too, or how niche you think it is. Like, as long as you're obsessed with it, that's going to shine through. And I think it's going to be beautiful.
I love that answer. And I think it's a great place to wrap up. Everyone, please, if you're able, get a copy of I Keep My Exoskeletons to Myself by Marisa Crane. Marisa, thank you so much for joining us. Go to the library, get it too. Go to your local independent bookstore. Go to the links we just put in the chat window. I'm very excited. Putting it on my bookshelf once again, it's going to go right there in a moment for the first time. And I'm really excited to have this as a permanent addition to my bookshelf. So Marisa, I love this book. I'm so glad I got to meet you previously. And I'm really excited to see how this book keeps doing and what comes next. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you, everybody, for coming.